Imagine carefully planning a crime that seems impossible to find, only for it to fall apart in the strangest way. For what reason would someone plan a murder so carefully? What happens when their seemingly perfect plan goes wrong? This video goes into some of the most shocking, almost perfect murders in U.S. history. It shows the chilling details and how these almost perfect crimes were found out. Both criminologists and the general public have been thoroughly captivated by the idea of the perfect murder for a very long time. It exemplifies the concept of a crime that is so thoroughly planned and carried out that it appears to be immune to detection or punishment. Throughout, spite of the fact that no murder can ever be regarded flawless, there have been a number of horrible crimes committed throughout the history of the United States of America that came perilously near to accomplishing this elusive ideal. Due to the fact that these crimes entail meticulous preparation, strategic execution, and horrifying displays of cunning, they are among the most captivating and disturbing stories that have ever been recorded in the annals of criminal history. This video examines a selection of these near-perfect crimes, focusing on the ways in which the perpetrators of these crimes came dangerously close to escape prosecution and the elements that finally led to their demise. The unsolved case of Jennifer McKinney's murder. The case of Jennifer McKinney, a lady who was 35 years old and lived in a suburban area in Texas, is considered to be one of the most notorious near-perfect crimes in modern American history in the United States. Jennifer's body was discovered in her residence on the morning of July 22, 2015, having been brutally murdered since the previous day. At first glance, it seemed to be an act of violence that was committed at random, and there was very little evidence to suggest who might have been responsible for it. On the other hand, as the investigators dug deeper into the case, they found that the offender had almost managed to evade justice by weaving a sophisticated web of deceit, betrayal, and calculated planning. According to early appearances, Daniel McKinney, Jennifer's husband, appeared to be a heartbroken spouse who was profoundly impacted by the passing of his wife. In addition to supplying the authorities with detailed details of the events that led up to the murder, he was completely cooperative with the authorities. However, as the investigation advanced, red flags were raised due to contradictions in Daniel's claims, as well as his behavioral patterns that became increasingly suspect. Daniel had methodically planned the crime, using his knowledge of the home's layout and security system to set the scene in a way that would point away from him as the prime suspect. This was shown by the forensic evidence that was gathered. Investigators were able to unearth critical evidence that finally led to Daniel's arrest, despite the fact that Daniel made considerable efforts to disguise his tracks. At approximately the same time that the murder took place, Daniel was seen on surveillance film from a camera belonging to a neighbor just next to the crime site. It was also discovered through forensic examination of the crime site that there were traces of DNA that were identical to Daniel's profile. These pieces of evidence, in conjunction with Daniel's erratic behavior and statements that contradicted each other, gave the investigators with the proof that was required to arrest him and charge him with the murder of his wife. The investigation into the Porsche murder. And further horrifying example of a murder that is virtually flawless is the case that involves the death of Richard Goodman, a wealthy businessman. On October 14, 2012, the body of Goodman was discovered inside of his lavish residence in Beverly Hills, often known as California. Despite the fact that there were no indications of forced entry or struggle, the murder scene appeared astonishingly clean. The preliminary investigation did not produce many clues, and the probe quickly became inconclusive. After conducting an exhaustive investigation into Goodman's life, the investigators found out that he had been involved in a lengthy legal fight with Michael Harris, who was a business associate of his. As a result of his reputation for being a ruthless individual and the fact that he had recently experienced financial troubles, Harris was a primary suspect in the investigations. The inquiry, on the other hand, uncovered the fact that Harris had a completely flawless alibi for the night that Goodman was murdered. A witness who had seen a suspicious person near Goodman's house on the night of the crime was the first piece of evidence that led to a breakthrough in the investigation. This witness did not come forward until several months later. The testimony of this witness, in conjunction with the forensic evidence that established the connection between Harris' vehicle and the investigation site, ultimately resulted in Harris' arrest. Following the conclusion of the investigation, it was discovered that Harris had painstakingly planned the murder and employed a complex approach in order to avoid being discovered. The hitman that he had hired had been given the directive to leave no trace behind, and he had manipulated the murder scene in order to divert suspicion away from himself. In spite of this, Harris was ultimately found guilty for his crime as a result of the combination of forensic evidence and witness testimony. The disappearance of the Williamson family is depicted here. The Williamson family, who were originally from North Carolina, disappeared without a trace in the year 2008, which is another scary example. A regular family outing to a neighboring park was the last time anyone saw the Williamson family, which included Sarah and David Williamson, as well as their parents, Robert and Laura Williamson. Following the family's failure to return home, the authorities began a comprehensive search operation. However, they were unable to locate any trace of the family. It appeared at first that the case was a terrible instance of missing persons. Nevertheless, as time went on, detectives began to think that there was some kind of criminal activity involved. A local fisherman made the discovery that the bodies of the Williamson family had been buried in a distant region, which reinforced their suspicions. The inquiry found that the family had been murdered and buried in a shallow grave. Nevertheless, the specifics of the crime remained unknown at the time of the investigation. After conducting further inquiries, the investigators came to the realization that the family had been the target of a local criminal by the name of Marcus Johnson, who had a history of committing violent felonies. For the purpose of carrying out the murder, Johnson had methodically planned the crime, making use of his familiarity with the neighborhood and his comprehension of the patterns that the family followed. He had initially been successful in evading notice by concealing the deaths and covering his tracks. But forensic evidence finally led to his detection and subsequent incarceration. DNA evidence established a connection between Johnson and the crime scene, and his confession was the piece of the puzzle that completed the picture. The case of the death of the deacon. The case known as Death of the Deacon is another illustration of a murder that was so close to being perfect that it almost went unnoticed. On November 5, 2004, the body of Deacon James Thornton, a well-respected community leader and philanthropist, was discovered inside his home in a remote area of Kentucky. There were no clear traces of violence or struggle in the picture, which was painstakingly prepared to look like a natural death. The early findings of the investigation into Thornton's death indicated that natural causes were responsible for his passing. However, when a medical examiner's study discovered that Thornton's system had evidence of a rare and powerful poison, suspicions began to emerge. After that, the scrutiny of the inquiry changed to concentrate on people who were closest to Thornton, such as his family and associates. It turned out that Thornton's wife, Evelyn, had been having an affair with a local businessman behind his back, and that the two of them had planned to kill Thornton in order to steal his riches. According to the findings of the forensic investigation, Evelyn and her accomplice were the ones who acquired the poison that was used to kill Thornton. This was a significant development in the case. Around the time that Thornton passed away, surveillance footage recorded the two individuals in the vicinity of his residence. Subsequently, a comprehensive inquiry of their financial situation uncovered evidence of their conspiracy. Eventually, Evelyn and her accomplice were taken into custody and charged with murder against each other. They were eventually unsuccessful in their attempt to cover their tracks and stage the murder scene, which was finally undone by the diligent work of investigators and forensic experts. It is possible that the concept of the perfect murder is an ideal that is difficult to achieve, but the stories presented below show how close some criminals have come to having achieved it. The lengths that people will go to in order to cover their tracks are demonstrated by the fact that each case entailed careful planning, strategic execution, and attempts to avoid detection. On the other hand, the criminals were ultimately brought to justice as a result of the unwavering commitment of law enforcement, the advancements in forensic technology, and the unwavering determination of justice administrators. A disturbing reminder of the dark possibilities of human creativity and the complications of criminal investigations. These killings that are virtually flawless serve as a reminder of both of these things. In doing so, they bring to light the constant difficulties that law enforcement agencies encounter while attempting to solve crimes and emphasize the significance of maintaining vigilance and perseverance in the pursuit of justice. These cases serve as a reminder of the ongoing conflict that exists between criminal minds and the forces that are committed to bringing them to justice, despite the fact that no murder can ever be considered flawless. If you found these near-perfect murder cases as gripping as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the world's most shocking and intricate criminal cases. Your support helps us bring you more captivating content.